Okay, I'm so excited that you guys now have access to Illustrator, and this is going to make our class go by so much easier. So when we're starting out with Illustrator, it's very similar to Photoshop. You're going to go to File, and we're going to choose New. And when we're learning stuff in this class, just for demonstration purposes, we always start with a 10-inch by 10-inch document because it's just easier to work with that way. I look at my advanced options down here, and I want to make sure I'm on RGB and then 72 PPI because that's easy to work with. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different in Illustrator than you will have in Photoshop is the use of artboards. So I'm going to make 3 artboards. An artboard would be similar to the canvas that we use in Photoshop. So we made 3 artboards, and I'm going to hit create. So a little bit about the environment. Let's reset our workspace. And there are 2 workspaces that you can use. One is classic, which is I like it because it's similar to Photoshop. It has options up here at the top that are similar to what we see in Photoshop, but some people prefer to work in the new Essentials layout, which you'll see that options bar at the top disappears and everything's done over here on the right side of the screen. I want you to know that both workspaces are there because in some of our assignments, they'll switch back and forth between using Essentials and Essentials Classic. So I don't want that to throw you off. The next difference that we're going to talk about in Illustrator is you have a selection tool, which is basically the same thing as your move tool. It'll select objects that you can move around. And then the direct selection tool is going to select our paths and our anchor points. Remember that Illustrator is a vector assignment, or a vector graphic program, so we use lots of anchor points and paths. You'll notice that down here at the bottom of your toolbar, we have a stroke and a fill. It's no longer foreground background. Now it's stroke and fill. And you'll notice that a lot of the same tools look very similar to what we worked with in Photoshop. So if you're taking notes during this demonstration, one of the first things I want you to write down is when we talk about the white arrow, which is our direct selection tool, the keyboard command or the key to get that is the letter A, and the one to get the regular selection tool is going to be V, which is your black arrow V, which is cool because it's the same thing that we used for move. Now, one thing that is kind of neat is when you see the little tools over here on the side that have a pull out from it. For example, the pen tool has a deal. In Photoshop, we would refer to this as like opening a drawer. But in Illustrator, they've done something even cooler. So my drawer is open. I can actually, let's see if it'll work. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. If I double click on that little arrow that came out to the side, we can move the tool drawers out here into the open. That's called tearing away the tools. So that's kind of a neat thing that Illustrator has that Photoshop didn't. Okay, so let's talk about some of the tools that we work with a lot in Photoshop. We want to talk about using a rectangle tool. And when you select your rectangle tool up here at the top, we want to choose what color we're going to make it for our fill and our stroke. The cool thing about Illustrator is you can actually draw stuff and it will have no fill and no stroke, and so you can fill it in after you've created the shape. Okay, so what we're going to do, let's start with a black fill. I'm going to do no stroke. And so when I click on my artboard, it will give me the option where I can type in numbers. If I know a specific number, maybe I want to do a 4-inch by 1-inch rectangle. I can click OK, and there's my 4-inch by 1-inch rectangle. Another way that I can work with my tools is I can click and drag. You'll notice that when we drag, the measurements are out there to the side, so I could get a 4-inch. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to work with. Now, if I've created my shape and I realize that after the fact I need to resize it to something different, over here on the Properties panel, it's on the right side of the screen, I could now change this to a 4-inch, let's see if that's an inch, 4-inch by, oh, hang on, I'm changing my X and my Y axis. I need to do 4 inches. It's been a rough day. And then I can change this one to 1 inch. The X and the Y coordinates that I started to change just changes where it appears on the screen. So I'm going to press enter, and now you'll see that my size is exactly 4 inches and exactly 1 inch because it matches up with the one I drew before. Now I'm going to press delete just to get rid of that so that we can play around a little bit more. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch and do the ellipse tool. And I'm going to be working with my tools quite a bit. So I'm going to double click over here on this little arrow to bring out, my tools so that I can use them quickly. So the next thing I want to do, let's move this rectangle over a little bit. I'm going to use the ellipse tool, and I'm going to make a circle. Now, I want to make an exact copy of this, and when we did the melon head lesson back in Photoshop at the beginning of the year, last year, or any of the lessons we did in Photoshop, when you wanted to make a copy of something and keep it on the same layer, we used the Move tool, and we held down Alt. The cool thing is here I am with the Move tool. If I hold down Alt, you're going to see it gets another double arrow, and I can drag it over and make a copy of that particular shape. Okay, so the next thing, let's practice doing some more rectangles. So on my rectangle here, I'm going to draw it, and you'll notice that there's a lot of little pink lines that are popping up. Those are called smart guides, and our smart guides help us to line stuff up, and they're really handy to use. Okay, so I'm going to go back, I'm going to click on the V key on my toolbar, or my keyboard, sorry, to get the selection tool, and now I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm dragging this over, and so I'm starting to make a really cute little music note. And so the next thing that I'm going to do, let's do one more rectangle, and I'm going to make it really skinny. And I have this rectangle right here. And so now I've built this shape. Let's see what that looks like in the layers panel for just a second. So the layers panel is going to look a lot different in Illustrator than it did in Photoshop. Okay, so in Photoshop, you had more control over what was in the content of each layer. What we've got here is I'm working with one layer, and inside that layer, I have 6 different shapes. So every time I made a shape, it creates its own layer over here. So if I want to click on one of the ellipse, I can come over here and click on the dot in my layers panel, and it will be selected. So that's kind of a thing that's a little different than Photoshop. It took my students a while to get used to seeing a lot of things inside their layers panel. And so we don't worry so much about naming our layers anymore because you have so many of them. So what we want to do is I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes here. And if I were to move one of them around, then let's try that. If I move one around, it moves it independently of the shape. We don't want that to happen. So what we want to do in Photoshop, we would select all of the items. So what I did to select everything, I can do Control A still, or I can just use my Move tool and draw an imaginary box around all of the shapes, and it will select everything. Now in Photoshop, we would group those objects, so I can do that. Control G, it's the same keyboard command. And so now I can move them, but they're still individual pieces. So it's one way of creating a new image. Another way, I'm going to ungroup that so we can still see that they're different pieces, is to select everything. And over here on the toolbar, we have this really, really cool tool called the Shape Builder tool. The keyboard command for it is Shift-M. In class, we jokingly call it the drunken snowman because it looks like a snowman that's fallen over. And so what I do in order to make this work is I'm going to select all of my objects, and I come over here and I click on the drunken snowman. And as I hover my mouse over the objects, you're going to see that they kind of get a dashed piece on them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw with my drunken snowman a line that goes through all these pieces. And so as you notice, as I'm doing it, they're all still selected. Okay, and then I'm going to go across here. Whoops, I may have just messed up. Yeah, I did. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to do. So now I've got this one object that is all one piece. I no longer see all the different little pieces put together over here in my layers panel because it's seen as one object. The problem with doing this part is once you have made it one object, there's really no going back and breaking it back into other little pieces. So that's kind of a bummer deal. So when I have an object like this, I have a free transform option down here on my toolbar, and I can click on it and resize my objects the same way I would in a Photoshop class. And then to get out of the free transform, I can just click on another piece of the screen or another part of the screen. Okay, so the next thing we are going to talk about is brushes. Okay, and so in brushes, we have some brush options that will come over here. In brushes, I have my fill color. Let's change ours to green for just a second. Is what color will happen whenever I paint with something. So here, when I drag my line, it's a uniform brush. That means that it just went straight across and there's no variation in my line. Now I can bring my stroke up and draw a thicker line with a brush. The other cool thing is I can come down here. If I choose a profile, I can do width. And so when I draw my, whoa, that one didn't work out so well. Let's try, see if I can make it happen. So if I, let's choose one that we've already made. And now if I click on it, goodness, I don't know what's happening here. That's okay, there's a mistake, but we will work with it. Okay, other things is I can come over here to where it says 5-point round. That's just basically the normal brush that we would pick, but you also have some other options down here like charcoal. So if I wanted to paint something and make it look like it was done with charcoal, let's get a bigger stroke here so you guys can see it. If I paint with my brush, it's going to paint as if I'm painting with charcoal. So it's kind of a cool deal. You'll notice that after I paint with something, when I go back and I select it, what I did is I painted a stroke, or I painted a path when I made the stroke. So if I want to click on something after I've painted it, I can come down here and choose to change that paint color. So that's kind of easy, and it's a neat thing that we didn't have in Photoshop. It didn't work the same way. Okay, so we're going to go to our next artboard and we're going to choose the type tool. And when I have my type tool, I can click over here and I'll notice that when I click on the screen, my type is still selected and it gives me a placeholder. And so over here on, I can either do it in my characters panel over here on the side, or I still have choices at the top. So what I want to do is I want to choose 60 point. So I'm going to do my size first. I'm going to do 60 point, and I'm going to do, I don't know, for just time's sake, we can leave it with Myriad Pro. I let all the kids in class choose what they wanted to do. And so I'm going to type my initials, and I'm going to press center. And so what it did is it centered it from where I started on the page. Now, if I want it to be perfectly centered in the document or on the artboard, as I drag it, the smart guides kind of helped me figure out where it was going to go. Okay, so now we want to create a frame. So we're going to come over to our shapes and we want to get the ellipse tool. Now in older versions of Photoshop, if you wanted to make a perfect circle, we held down the shift key and you'll see that you get those little crosshairs inside. Now in, oh, I just said Photoshop, I meant Illustrator. In the new Illustrator, as we draw it, if we start to get like an oval, the pink guides will disappear, but if I have it perfectly squared off or perfect ratio, you'll notice I get the same little crosshairs when I'm drawing. So that makes it pretty cool. Let's change our color I'm going to choose this hot pink magenta color, and I'm going to take my move tool and I'm going to place my shape on top of my initials. Now the problem is that it's covering it up. I'm going to open my layers panel and I can see that just like in Photoshop, I could click on my initials and drag them up here in my stacking order. Okay, I'm going to undo that. Or I can click on this shape and choose Arrange, and I can choose to send it back. And so it'll put it back behind there. Okay, so that is kind of a quick and easy way of working with shapes. Now, I'm going to show you one thing that is very similar to Photoshop, but it is something that works a little different in Illustrator. So I'm just going to stay with my same pink color up here, and I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to draw a box. Okay, and so when I draw my rectangle, I'll see that I have the rectangle is made up of 4 corner anchor points. So when I click on the anchor points, when I automatically clicked on my direct selection tool, you'll see that all of the anchor points got selected at one time. And so sometimes students get really frustrated because they're trying to move this anchor point to do something, but it won't let you move it. So all 4 of these anchor points are selected. I only want to move this one corner anchor point. So I'm going to click on the anchor point, and now I can come in and resize and play with my box and change it up. If I were to click on the center of a path and drag it out, it's going to get that whole line. So it'll adjust the path instead of just the anchor point. Okay, now when I click back on the inside of my shape, I notice I get these little handles right here. Okay, these are corner handles. So if I start to pull it in, now it tells me it can't go any further, but it will start rounding off those corner points. So that's pretty handy when you're working in shapes. Okay, so another tool that we can work with is our star tool. And when we work with our star tool, as you draw it, it's automatically going to come out with a default 5-point star. So my default star looks like this. But the cool thing is if I start to draw a star, as I'm still drawing the star, I'm holding down my mouse, I can use my up arrow keys or my down arrow keys to control the number of sides that I get. So if you were told to make a triangle, we could actually do it with a star and then just eliminate the sides until we got to 3. Another way that we can make the triangle, and this is a little bit different, is we could start with a square, and then if I click on my pen tool and I hover over one of my anchor points, I can get rid of the anchor point, and then I would come over here with my direct selection tool and drag it out. That's a little bit more complicated. Either way would work fine. And I noticed that because I'm on my direct selection tool, I see this little handle that's inside here. And so I can shrink that handle down, and you notice that they didn't have handles on these bottom 2 corners, but it did on the top one. So when I did that, it's only going to affect that one anchor point. And so now I have more like a Bezier curve than I did before. Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's talk about I'm going to turn this triangle into a different color. This will just make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing. And I'm going to move this triangle on top of my pink blob right here. And this time I want to use my Drunken Snowman, the shape builder tool, but I want to do something a little bit different. I don't want to combine these 2 shapes. I want to cut out a triangle that's in the middle of this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to select my my 2 shapes. You'll notice these shapes up here got selected because when I made the square, it touched the edge of them. That's okay. It's not going to affect what we're doing right here. Now, if I hover my mouse over the shapes, you'll see that they get selected again. But if I hold down Alt, which is so cool, guys, because it's the same subtract key that we used in Photoshop, Thank you, Adobe. If I held down Alt, I get a minus sign. I don't know if you can see the minus sign in my video, but if I do that and I click with my Alt, what it did is it took away that shape that was in the center. So there's all kinds of possibilities of shapes and pictures that you can make just using simple shapes and making some small adjustments. We're going to stop right there, and I'll let you look at the demo notes that I have provided in your lesson. And then what I would like for you to do, there are a few practice things for you to try. Okay, so in this guided demo, I'm going to include these sample images. And so what I want you to do is I want you to try creating the images that you see here using the lessons that we just learned. I'll show you one last trick real quick to get the seeds inside the watermelon. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to get an ellipse tool. I don't really care what color we're using right now. As a matter of fact, we're not going to use a color. Just do like this to make it a little bit easier. When I draw my ellipse, I automatically get the 4 anchor points that you would normally see in a lesson. And so when I click on an anchor point, it's going to select just that one anchor point. Now I want to convert it to a different type of point. Right now it's a Bezier curve because I see the handles. But if I hold down my, let's see, if I hold down my control key, it will allow me to, to adjust those handles. So if I pull this handle in here and I pull this handle in here, I get the anchor points, but it doesn't exactly look the way I want it to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my pen tool. I'm going to tear this off. And if I do the convert anchor tool symbol and I click right here, now that turns it from a Bezier curve to a point. And so if I click on that point and drag it up, now I get more of the teardrop shape that I would see in those in the shapes that we're going to make. Okay, and then the other thing is when we're working with the pen tool, let's switch back to the regular pen tool. Whenever it works just like it did in Photoshop. If I click and click, I make straight lines. If I click and then I click and drag, I get Bezier curves. And if I see handles right here, I know that my next click will be will finish out the curve. One of the things that's cool about Adobe Illustrator is that in Photoshop, I would have to go back and click on hold down the Alt key and click on the anchor point. But if I just click on that anchor point, it's going to break that handle off. So now I could get if I click down here, it's going to give me a straight line instead of a curved line because there isn't a Bezier curve to work with. So that is super, super nice. To get out of a path, so let's say I want to draw a path, but I'm ready to do something else. If I hit enter on my keyboard, that path is still there, but now I'm ready to go do some other things. Before I move on, I'm going to click on this path and I'm going to apply a stroke to it so that when I deselect it, I can see what I'm working with. So to to get out of a path and continue work on it, we would hit enter and it would just get us out of it. So let's make another little line real quick. And so here you'll see that it's making a path, but it's using a blue stroke. And so if I double click on my enter tool, it gets me out of that. Now one of the things I want you to be really careful about whenever you start drawing using the pen tool is right here we have a fill color and we have a stroke color. And unless you are really super good at seeing how things should turn out whenever you're finished, I recommend do not draw anything with a stroke on it using the pen. Just go ahead and make the shape and then apply the stroke. It's a whole lot easier and it will save you lots and lots of headaches. I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to turn you loose on the class assignment. Let's see, where is it? Right here. So we would use the shape builder tool to build this cute little music note. In here, this is going to be a combination of the shape builder tool, and then we're going to use the, let's see, hexagon shape, this one right here. And so we would create that shape, and then to get the, to get this cutout, we would use the shape builder with our Alt tool, and this is just the shape builder with a rectangle taken out. The rounded corner of the eraser is how we used with the little handles that we made. So all of this is pretty easy, and I think you guys can do it pretty simple. On the eyeball here, we're just converting these two anchor points to sharp anchor points. These, it would still have a Bezier curve on the top and bottom of the white part of the eye. Anyway, if you have questions, email me, and I am so excited that you guys get to work with Illustrator now. This is a total game changer for us. Thanks.